Hi, everyone. Welcome to Empower. I hope that everybody's having an awesome time going through all the sessions. In today's session, we're going to talk about Quickbase's role in empowering the KPMG third-party continuous assessments and monitoring model. So without further ado, let's get started. So my name is Nashmia Burney. I am a senior solutions consultant here at Quickbase. I've been with the company for about 3 years now. And fun fact, prior to working for Quickbase, I actually used to be a customer of Quickbase, just like Adam and Tom are. And I come with an extensive project management background, and my role at Quickbase is to help customers realize the potential and the value of the Quickbase platform. So I'm going to welcome Adam and Tom to introduce themselves. Adam, take it away.
Great, thank you. Excited to be here today with you all virtually. My name is Adam Brand. I'm a managing director at KPMG in our cybersecurity practice. I spent many years in cybersecurity, kind of running the gamut from incident response to compliance, and now focused on third-party security, which is the topic of today's conversation. And in particular, helping us lead and adapt to a world where things need to move faster. We're all talking about speeding up the pace at which we're able to do assessments while maintaining quality. So very excited to speak with you today about this innovation. Tom?
Hi everyone, Tom Nash here. Thank you for the invite to present to you. I'm a manager based in New York, working within Adam's team, and I help develop the CAM use case that is being powered by Quickbase that we'll be talking about to you today.
Awesome. Thank you, Adam and Tom. So we've got quite an awesome agenda to cover today, starting with Adam and Tom, who are going to cover and share the KPMG problem statement, where they talk about why cybersecurity is a top issue among CEOs globally, while focusing on third-party security as the key area. They're also going to cover some really interesting facts about the KPMG journey with its challenges and Quickbase's role in their journey as well. We're then going to take a closer look at the application structure within the use case deep dive. We're then going to see the application in action in demo, and then we're going to cover some key takeaways and open it up to Q&A. One thing I'd like to remind you all is that there is a Q&A box on your window, so you can always leave some questions for us to answer throughout this whole session. All right, so Adam, take it away.
Great, thank you, Nashmia. So, recognizing that not everyone in the audience is a cybersecurity person living and breathing this every day, just a little backdrop. As I'm sure most of you are aware, there's been a pretty sharp uptick in attacks over the past few years. Cyber breaches getting headlines on a regular basis. We see impacts to national infrastructure. It's a very serious topic, and that's being recognized by organizations at the board level. So you can see in terms of the board's top priorities across their organizations, cybersecurity continues to be in the top and increase. And in fact, in the last survey, as you can see here, right there at the top as a key concern of boards and executives when they think about the risks facing their firm. Within that, third-party security is a key focus area. And that's the idea that while you can do what you can do to control the risks within your own firm, when you send data to another firm or you rely on another firm for a key service, you're essentially at the mercy of their cyber program. And that's created a lot of issues, especially for companies that have invested heavily in cybersecurity, only to have their name in the headlines due to a breach that's spawning from a third party. And so we've seen many of these over the years, cases ranging from sending data to a debt collection firm, for example, which happened a few years ago, where some major firms were impacted due to a security breach at that much smaller firm. We've also seen some headlines recently about software that firms are running being compromised and leading to vulnerabilities within the organizations that use that software. So it's become a very hot topic. It's certainly one as well where there's recognition that there's something that needs to change. The current model, which we'll go into a little bit more in a minute here, is broken, especially when you think of the backdrop of companies are increasingly relying on third parties. You think about SaaS models, you think about the idea of, let's focus on what we're good at, that type of thing. So there's a huge push and effort towards increasing these services. At the same time, there's regulatory pressures that are also increasing. So certainly in financial services for years, this has been a focus area. As those of you that have maybe seen the recent executive order on cybersecurity, this is actually a much broader topic impacting many more organizations. So I think that we'll continue to see increased scrutiny in this area, which is another reason why it's very important to address in a meaningful way. So let's look at the existing model or historical model, you can say, for third-party security and talk a little bit about some of the challenges that our clients face using this model and how we're looking towards a new, more advanced model that provides a number of advantages. So starting at the far left corner is this idea of an individual assessment. So imagine you as a company are procuring a vendor through a SaaS model or otherwise. You might have some questions about the security practices of that vendor. So you want to do your own due diligence before you put your data in there, before you use them for a critical service. And so often what will happen is the cybersecurity group, in coordination with privacy and legal, will create a questionnaire based on some industry standard or just based on their own control framework, listing out hundreds potentially of questions for the vendors to complete, depending on the risk tier of the vendors. Typically, those that are lower risk, there's less diligence on. Those that are higher risk receive a higher level of scrutiny. But in any case, there's this idea that as an individual company, you're going to send that questionnaire or a link to that questionnaire to a vendor, and they're going to invest time and effort in replying to that, answering those detailed questions, often attaching relevant evidence such as a policy or procedure or a screenshot or something like that. And then that goes back to you as the client to review, and you might have some questions and some back and forth. So that's a typical model maybe that many of you have encountered as you've looked to onboard vendors. Some of the advantages to that model are that firstly, it is tailored towards the actual needs of your organization. So you're able to ask those questions that are most relevant for you, and you're also able to I would say, define some of the parameters that are acceptable to you based on your risk appetite for that vendor. So for example, if you're sending that vendor some highly sensitive information, social security numbers or PHI, you will want to dig in on many of those questions in things like, how long is the data retained? What are the encryption protocols around that data? Whereas if you're just using the vendor for marketing materials or run-of-the-mill, semi-confidential information, the bar will be somewhat lower. You may not ask those questions. So the advantage there is that it's being tailored to specifically what you're looking for. And from a timing perspective, you're getting the answers when you ask the questions. The challenges there, though, that many firms have experienced and continue to experience with this model is that there's a significant level of effort and cost associated with this. You'll see that you may have hundreds of vendors that need to be reviewed on an annual basis. And if there's an acquisition of your firm and you need to revet all the vendors of that acquired company, that can result in a huge influx of those. There's also a high latency because there's so many of these assessments to do, and each assessment takes so much time in terms of the back and forth with the vendor, that you really will only have the opportunity to do these assessments, say, once per year or once every 3 years. And that can cause some issues where when you think about how quickly the threat environment is changing and how quickly the control environment within that company may change, the results of your assessment from 11 months ago on several controls may not be highly relevant. So another challenge there too is, there's effort on the other side from a third-party perspective in terms of answering the questionnaires. And so when they are bombarded with 20 different questionnaires every week for their team to complete, they get bogged down. There's a backlog there. It creates enormous costs for them. You see vendors setting up teams of people that solely focus on answering these questions. And it can be a very challenging proposition for them. So as a result of some of these challenges, we have seen in the industry over the years a movement, or at least the availability of a shared assessment model. And the idea there is that rather than every single customer independently assessing vendors for the benefit of everyone in cost sharing, there could be another entity that would assess the vendor and provide that results to a variety of their customers upon request. So the idea being that the vendor would complete something once and many customers could use it at a much lower cost. And in that case, you're able to speed up the process somewhat and reduce the effort. However, that introduces its own challenges. As I highlighted earlier, the ways in which people use vendors can be very different. And so if in the shared assessment model that was done on the basis of this SaaS platform dealing with some level of confidential information, that may not provide the level of detail that you as an organization need for your specific use case. So if you are putting in highly sensitive, say, credit card data or PHI into that environment, the shared assessment that you're receiving may not contemplate that. It may be broader based, and as such, you're not able to get the ultimate value that you need out of that. In addition, the same type of shared assessments suffer from latency as well. These assessments still take time to complete, at least initially. And so organizations that perform these shared assessments are not doing this on a weekly basis or a monthly basis. Typically, they're doing it on a more infrequent basis, say every 6 months to a year, depending on the tier of vendor. So that still provides that still has the challenge of this data is not the freshest data. And so when you're thinking about managing your risks associated with third parties, you still have that hiccup in the model. In addition to that, there's some challenges in terms of the scope of these assessments. And this is true somewhat for the individual assessment as well. But when you think about when you have assets at a vendor, say, key information, or you're relying on key systems, you're really interested in the security of those specific systems or things that can impact them. You're not super interested in enterprise-wide security or security of other services that you're not using. And so the challenge sometimes becomes in these individual assessments, as well as the shared assessments, that the scope is pretty broad. And in particular, when you think about a shared assessment model, multiple customers could use multiple services. So when you're thinking about assessing that, what does the assessment cover? And does it, if it's supposed to cover all services, does it cover each of those in sufficient depth for your risk appetite? So there's still challenges with this shared model. So what we're looking for here in the future state is something that's more automated, more real-time information about controls. And that's enabled through this continuous assessments platform and model that we'll share here in a minute. In this model, what we're doing is we're providing real-time control data from vendors directly to their customers. And we're doing that, that transmission digitally and in a way that provides for some boundaries still between the vendor and the client, so that it's not that the customers are getting into the vendor's business, if you will. There's still that level of abstraction that occurs when completing the questionnaire, which we'll show you in a minute. So more around pass fail, as opposed to here's the specific vulnerabilities this specific system is vulnerable to. As a result of this real-time information, you're able to, in this model, you're able to tailor this. So when you think about something like patch management, which is very important changes potentially on a week-to-week basis in terms of the vulnerabilities there, you as an organization through this continuous assessments model are able to frame your scope of your continuous assessment to only those assets that you particularly care about. So when you think about the hundreds and maybe thousands of systems that an organization has, you're able to, in a continuous assessments model that we'll share, really zoom in on those 10 hosts or those 3 systems. If you think about a system as a collection of hosts, those things that are key and important for you, and that eliminates some of the noise that you'll see in other models. It kind of a contrasting view to this would be the outside in model that a number of vendors offer, which is, they will scan some of your vendors and look for vulnerabilities in the internet-facing perimeter. And oftentimes what happens with those models is that there's a lot of noise around that that's not exactly pertinent to the specific service and the specific systems that you care about. So with this model, it's behind the firewalls, you'll see here in a minute, provides for real-time control data. It also discourages risk acceptance because you're able to see the status of this control on a weekly basis. So, if you're seeing, for example, in your individual assessments, issues coming back and the business owner says, oh yeah, I accept the risk of, this particular patch not being there. With this continuous assessment model, you're seeing that result on a week-to-week basis. And so it's more of a high-level visibility of this is a continuing risk that we need to address. So some of the challenges with this model, we're working to minimize the level of effort on the vendor side, but there still is a setup level of effort here. There's investment. There's still a potentially shift in mindset when you think about just the idea of vendors providing access to some of this information. There's, we'll talk about this later, there can be a lot of questions and potentially pushback on this model. And that said, we do feel that the benefits far outweigh some of these challenges, and we'll continue to see a shift in this, towards this model into the future as organizations look for better ways to manage their third-party risk. Now, that's not to say that some of these other ones go away completely. The continuous assessments model is focused on those controls that are most critical and would change most frequently. So you still will likely have some form of annual assessment that involves things like security questionnaires. Do you have a CISO? Do you have an information security policy? Those things that don't change that frequently, but are also very easy to answer. This continuous assessments model is focused more on those controls that are, are you patching? Is this system up to date on patches? Is it being monitored? Does it have a DLP tool active, anti-malware active, those types of things? So it provides for a lot of benefits while still integrating some of the other models that we're seeing. So I'm going to turn it over to Tom now, who's going to talk a bit more about the solution architecture and some of the underpinning technical details. Tom?
Thank you very much, Adam. Okay, so on screen we're showing the architecture of the model. And so you can see that within the third party or the vendor component, what the role that Quickbase solves is to extract the information out of the source system, which we're calling the aggregation capability. It can then concatenate the data across multiple source systems. Multiple source systems are being used to manage the same control, and translate it into the industry schema. The industry schema is the OSCAL, the Open Security Controlled Assessment Language, which is a schema being developed by NIST that KPMG is participating in the working groups of. With this information in the machine readable format, it can then be shared into the organization or the client who can analyze it, test for compliance against their own SLAs, and then visualize and sort of have a response workflow in case of any exceptions. The key feature of this model is a high scalability of the shareability of the information. And this is because of the standard industry schema that enables machine readability. It's also agentless in both the third party and the client environments. And so we're using cloud-based Quickbase, so you don't have to plug anything into your environment if you want to use Quickbase. But also Quickbase's role is to power the model. And if someone wants to do it manually, there's nothing to stop them. In setting up this architecture, it enables customers to properly analyze how the risks that they're being exposed to from their third parties. And that is a continuous view at any given point in time. And this continuous view supports with the ticketing and remediation tracking in real time. We're really excited by the power of this model, and we're really confident that it has the ability to be transformational in third-party security. One of the reasons we're most excited by this is the fact that we see significant benefit on both the client and the third-party sides. So there is a push for adoption from both angles. On the client side, they benefit from a near real-time view on the security risks associated with any given third party. They can also track remediation of any non-compliant SLAs or SLOs to completion. As Adam mentioned earlier, this discourages risk acceptance. You can analyze the trending data through the visualization capability and predict or prevent non-compliance. It also improves the agility of the third-party security capability because you can move with the changing business needs through being able to collect the real-time data. On the third party, there's significant cost savings to be realized through the elimination of the incremental assessments. You can do test once, report many, so you only are checking for the answers once in your system, and then letting all your customers know what the status is there. It enables better visibility into your own internal environment as a third party that manage your client environments, so that you can really ensure that these are up to requirement. Through participating in a model like this, you can instill the confidence between the client and third party to deepen the network integration, and as they are integrated, so they can grow through together. By participating in this model, you can more quickly react and better tailor the reaction to issues as they arise to make sure that you're responding in a way that your client would expect for. So alongside Quickbase, the other key component that is powering this model is the Open Security Controlled Assessment Language, or OSCAL. So as we previously alluded to, OSCAL is a set of formats being developed by NIST, and they can be expressed in XML, JSON, and YAML. The formats represent control catalogs, baseline and security system plans, assessment results, and assessment plans and results. So it covers the stack of the assessment process. These are really important to getting the model working because they standardize how we talk about control information. They enable the assessment of control implementation across multiple components. So you can concatenate together the components through Quickbase. And they're interoperable, and they can support multiple regulatory frameworks. So you can it's built on NIST 853, but could easily work on ISO or any of the other frameworks. And it enables the automation of the reporting of the documentation, reviews, and control assessments. It's a very powerful and highly extensible language. On screen now is a diagram of how the Quickbase works for the third party. So as you can see, Quickbase can feed into both the cloud security tools and the on-premises security tools. And the data can be fed into the Quickbase application, shared back into the third-party environment once structured. So the third party can then review if they want to, and then shared into the customer environments in the OSCAR format. It's very sort of easy to use, which I think is one of the key benefits. So why Quickbase? Why did we decide to go with Quickbase to help power the continuous assessments and monitoring model? So we've been really impressed with the functionality of the Quickbase pipeline capability. It suits for this use case very effectively. We're also really excited by this sort of plug and play adoption capability that this enables third parties. There's very little setup requirement or setup complexity for a vendor wishing to adopt if they are to use the Quickbase pipelines, and we'll demo that to you shortly. We're also excited by the fact that Quickbase technologies are already in use at many third parties that we see adopting this continuous assessment monitoring model. And so they're not going to have to go through the same scrutiny and level of due diligence if they want to adopt for Quickbase and continuous assessment monitoring. So my last slide is, where are we on the journey? And so we've completed a proof of concept with a top 10 bank, which was the customer, and a commercial lending platform, which was its vendor. And for our proof of concept, we actually proved everything that we set out to prove. We showed how scalable this model can be and how powerful it can be in the tracking and monitoring and remediation of risk items. We're building out more and more pipeline capabilities with Quickbase to cater for the range of different security tools that many vendors have in place. And we anticipate completing solution pilots within the next 3 to 6 months, post which we'll be able to scale the model even further.
Thank you so much, Adam and Tom. So great, we talked about the KPMG problem statement. Next, what I'm going to talk about is the use case deep dive. So let's take a closer look at the app structure. So here you could see the app's data model. What's happening in the application is there are 2 key users that would use this app. So this is for vendors and then clients of those vendors. So for clients, when a new client is created through a vendor, what happens next is they create a assessment definition where they select the services to report on, which will essentially hold assessment run logs. Now, these run logs can be automatic on schedule, or they can be manually created as well through a click of a button. So once saved, there's a pipeline that kicks off in the background, and it goes out and it says, go get me all the controls and the hosts that are tied to the technology services. So once that assessment has been defined, the controls and hosts are in place, Quickbase creates an assessment run log, which will again kick off a pipeline to execute queries against Splunk and Qualys in this scenario to get the latest reports on vendor vulnerability scans. So in turn, you could see that there are multiple controls to test against and hosts to report against for each assessment definition. So those control findings get added automatically, giving either a pass or a fail as a result. And then essentially an OSCAL report is generated in a JSON format using an OSCAL format. So we're going to see real shortly what this application looks like, but I just want to talk a little bit about pipelines in this scenario. So for those of you who don't know what pipelines is our low-code integration capability inside of Quickbase. It helps you fully integrate your data across different systems, whether they're in the cloud or on-prem. So you can automate your workflows, including steps and conditions, as you can see on the image on my screen. So this is an example of a pipeline that's going to be running in our demo video shortly. So what the pipeline, again, in this scenario is going to do is it's going to execute queries to Splunk and Qualys and give us an OSCAL report in JSON format that we're going to see. So an example of that is right here on the slide. So you can see that there's a ton of data over here that's being displayed in an OSCAL format. Awesome. So we're going to jump into demo mode, and I'm going to have we'll have Adam talk a little bit about the application. So.
All right. So here we go. Just thinking about the application from both the vendor and the client side, and there's some nuances here that I'll share with you. But you can see an example here. A dashboard where the vendor is able to see, some of the vulnerabilities that they might have with their existing systems, so that they can have the opportunity to take care of those as soon as possible. Here they can add in a client. So we'll just see how that's going up. All right. Now the vendor has the ability to add the assessment definitions as well and define the scope of the assessment or services. In this particular demo, we're actually showing a case where the client has some flexibility there as well. But this, of course, depends on the relationship between the client and the vendor and the level of transparency that they want to provide it. But the end result is that there is an assessment definition. So for this continuous assessment, it needs to be defined. What is the scope here in terms of the services to report against? So as you can see here, there's 2 services available for this particular client. And this is important because there's a linkage here between the services that the client is selecting and then ultimately the hosts that may be relevant for that particular service. And so here you can see an example where taking the next level on this particular assessment, now that the services have been defined, we're going to run an assessment, and this will be a manual one that we're showing in the demo. Of course, this would be scheduled once it's set up. But in order to run it, we need to fully define, so the vendor can choose here, okay, these are the hosts that are in scope for this client, or if they're providing that transparency that a client, these are the ones that they're going to select, as well as what controls are they interested in seeing. So in this case, we're talking about high-risk vulnerabilities, reporting on those, as well as the ability to log. So you can see those here at the top of the screen. So now once the assessment is run, we're going to generate that backend set of activities. It's going to use pipelines to go out and grab the information directly from the source system. So thinking about a Qualys or a Splunk, actually grabbing the data directly from the system of record in terms of where does this fall and the parameters that we've established, such as the time to patch or the fact that this needs to be monitored or not. So here you can see the completed definition or the completed assessment, as well as the resulting JSON file. And a key here is that from the JSON file perspective, the client can consume this in many ways. This again could be automated and ingested into a client environment, say an existing dashboard. We'll just see that pop up here in a minute. So here's an example of the file, and you can see here the implementation status is simply conforms or not conforms for this particular finding for the scope. So the customer doesn't need to know and doesn't care about every single nitty-gritty detail about which host is not reporting back or what the vulnerabilities are, which is a key a key concern that some vendors have is how much visibility is the vendor going to have into my environment. And so that's really something we want to show here. Hopefully this gives you an idea of the possibilities here as we continue to work through this model. All right, so let's talk about some key takeaways here. So as we talked about earlier, third-party security is a key focus area. There's a lot of risk here. There's a lot of wasted energy, overlaps in terms of what different clients are doing for the same vendor, challenges with the vendors in terms of being able to respond in a timely fashion. So a lot of challenges in this space, and the models are broken even inherently, many of them, because really what you're trying to do as an organization is determine what is your risk at any given point in time so that you can make risk-based decisions. And so you'll do that internally, for example, with those controls that change frequently through frequent assessments, such as vulnerability scans, monitoring for changes in logs. You'll set up systems like antivirus, real-time alerting. All those things do not occur today in a third-party model, where the existing models focused on these point-in-time assessments. So it's really not giving you the timely information or the risk reduction that you otherwise would hope for. And so what we're looking at is the future state where, kind of enough is enough. We need something better, both from the vendors and the client side. Let's move past this idea of kind of checking the box, doing the perfunctory activity, knowing that it's not going to be that valuable 6 months, 10 months down the line. Let's move to something that's a bit more reasonable given the risk associated with some of these services that are going to vendors. And that's where we have the idea of the continuous assessment. And in this model that we've developed with Quickbase, the idea is not that customers are all of a sudden getting into the the business of third parties and monitoring the nitty-gritty of their environment. That's not what's happening here. It's really the same level of information that they're getting anyway on those annual assessments. So if you can imagine in an assessment, you might have a question on, are you patching every 90 days? And then you might ask them to show proof of that in a screenshot. Essentially similar things, pass, fail, not trying to get into breaking agency with the vendors. And with the Quickbase solution, we're able to do that in an agentless fashion. So we're not worried with the vendor about installing, dozens or potentially hundreds of agents across systems that could interrupt those system operations, or they could cause issues with needing to monitor those for uptime. This is a behind the firewall solution where Pipelines is able to call out and grab APIs either from cloud-based services or interfacing through push into the API from on-premise solutions. And so it's able to provide that information in a very restricted fashion. The system's able to scope out, these are the hosts of interest. Let's only retrieve information on those. Further with the security access controls on these systems of record, they could say, for this Quickbase service account, we can only focus on those that are, we can only provide that information that is specifically relevant to that particular customer, excluding the possibility that the API could return other things. So there's a lot of opportunity here to ensure the security of this solution as well. So what does the journey forward look like? As we mentioned earlier, we've done proof of concepts here. We have a number of interested customers and vendors. Ultimately, there's a little bit of a chicken and egg challenge here where, to the extent vendors are not on board with a solution, it can be challenging for customers. And to the extent that customers aren't asking for this, vendors may be reluctant. But we are working with a number of clients and vendors that see the power of this model. On the customer side, many of those, particularly in regulated industries, are looking for ways to show something different, show something beyond the expected, to prove to regulators that they are advancing. And then on the vendor side, the vendors are also looking for ways to differentiate. So this is a key avenue for them to be able to say, this is how we're different. We don't provide you with just a SOC report. We've got something much better. So hopefully, over the next few months, 6 to 8 months, we'll continue to onboard new vendors and clients, and maybe come back next year with Empower with some more customer case studies. So thank you again for your time. I'll turn it back to Nashmia.
Thanks so much, Adam. Thank you, Tom. So we're going to open up to Q&A now, and we hope that this session has been useful and helpful for you. Just a reminder, you will get a survey link, so please provide us feedback on how we did and how you like the session so that we can learn a little bit more and provide some more awesome content for our next Empower. So thank you, everyone. We'll take questions now.